Hey guys, welcome back to the Real Estate Monopoly. My name is Kerwin,
And my name is Kenneth.
and we are the Donis brothers. And today we have Saket Jain. Saket, thanks so much for being here. Let us know where you're at right now.
Oh, thank you, man. I'm actually in between of a rehab project. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. I know, Kenneth. You and I go way back, man. I can't even remember how we got introduced. So I'm glad to be on the show. You guys are rocking it. To your question, Kerwin, I am right now in between of a house that's getting rehabbed, and it's insane because it's a new house, but the builder didn't make the house to the plan, and thankfully we caught it. So everything is a mess right now.
Yeah.
So we're in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So
We're in
that's
Durham,
far.
so yeah, very close to us. But
Yeah.
I know we still need to meet up in
Yeah.
Raleigh. Instead of meeting on the networking events, we need to
Yeah.
meet up in our hometown.
I think the first time we met was in Belize in person.
I think you're right. Kenneth and I have known each other for a while, but
Okay.
first time I met Kenneth and you all was in Belize. It was a crazy event.
So funny.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into the value. So I know you grew up in India. I'd love to know, and I always ask this of anyone that comes from another country, like what lessons did growing up in India teach you, and how did those kind of translate into your real estate and entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I always tell people growing up in India teaches you one thing, which is love chaos. And if things are going too smooth in your life, you like to create chaos because that's the only way you learn how to operate, as in make sense out of chaos. Now, growing up, I did not realize it was going to be an essential skill to survive in this world. But as I reflect back, one of the things that we all see is we live in a chaotic world.
Yeah.
And there's always things that are going to be outside of our own control. So if you can manage chaos and come out of it in a way that's more aligned to your own values and your own morals, uh, there's nothing in life that can actually beat you down, right? Because chaos is going to happen, and chaos is essentially testing you to survive, to learn how to survive. So I think that's really cool. When I learned an essential skill growing up in India, which is how to thrive in chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do want to touch, like you mentioned, life itself can be very chaotic, but working a 9 to 5 and then like kind of just doing normal things to stay within your comfort zone kind of minimizes that chaos to an extent. But then when you throw yourself into entrepreneurship, having that skill of being able to manage stress and also chaos and just figure out problems and not try to freak out is super, super valuable. And that really distinguishes the people who achieve versus the people that aren't as successful. So that's a phenomenal point.
No, I couldn't agree more. Right. I think the one thing on just to add on to that is life's changing. Like for everyone, life is changing.
Yeah.
Now we could make it very stable and secure and consistent. But that's just a facade, because eventually, we were talking about 9 to 5 even before we started recording, and you just brought it up. 9 to 5 is not security. 9 to 5 is one thing and only one thing, which is a steady paycheck. And eventually that steady paycheck ends. It could end up because 5 people or 10 people in the boardroom decided you no longer need it, or your team is no longer needed for no fault of yours. You could fall sick, right? You could retire at 65. At some point, the steady paycheck is going to end. Mm-hmm. So it's not security, it's a facade. And but that facade does bring one thing, which is it removes a certain element of chaos from your life. So you're right about that. Now, I think that's a different debate, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was gonna kind of have you dive into. I know you went to Columbia. This is a really prestigious school, and so you did a lot of things right? And you were like in your comfort zone when you were at your job. And I believe you lost that job in 2016.
2018.
2018. Okay, sorry, 2018. And so in a way, like,
I wish I lost it 2016 because I'll be much further ahead. But 2018, yeah.
You would have thought that you would have kind of been able to like mitigate chaos in your life because you had done everything right, but in fact you found chaos anyway. So how did that experience kind of lead you to take more control of your financial future?
Yeah, so I think there's a few backstories. Right? One of the biggest backstory is I'll go a little bit in my background, then we'll come forward. Right. So I grew up in India in a family that we didn't have much growing up, but then eventually my dad and his brothers launched a successful business. Like you had Donis brothers, my dad and his 7 brothers were Jain brothers.
Awesome.
So that's what they did. And my dad always told me, why do you want to work for somebody else? Why don't you start your own company? Like, why don't you just come and run the business? And I always told him, I want to do bigger and better things. I don't like your business. It's so small. Like whatever. I made up excuses with my limiting beliefs. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go work for a big Fortune 500. I'm gonna go get some degrees because that's what I had a vision of what success means. But
Mhm.
in 2018, and I did all of that, right? I went to IIT, which is the best engineering school in India. I went to Columbia Business School for MBA. I worked for top management consulting firm, Fortune firm 500. I'm right now at Airbnb. Well, along the way, something drastically happened which shifted my mental model. And the mental model was 9 to 5. Or when I say 9 to 5, it's not really 9 to 5 because most people end up working 60, 80, 100 hours a week. So we're
Yeah.
using 9 to 5 as a metaphor, whatever that means for anybody. For me, it was never 9 to 5, but you will use a W-2 job, right? So my
Yeah.
job required me to work my butt off, have no time of my own, with the false sense that I had in mind was I have security, but it wasn't, right? And until 2018, when that incident happened, my I was shook to the core, right? Because I'm like, my whole mental model just shifted. Now, unfortunately, as a consultant, I was part of these decision making. I was advising companies, and we would call them as workforce optimization, which essentially means let's lay some people off
Yeah.
because your numbers don't make any sense, right? And then I didn't realize, I'm like, you know what? I was emotionless because it was not happening to me, which is the unfortunate part of what I didn't realize. I wish I had recognition of that early on, so I could have sort of put it on myself and see what it feels to be on the other side. But I didn't. Regardless, 2018 when it happened to me, I was devastated. Right, we were in Wisconsin. I remember our kids were going to private schools. Like we had everything going for us, and now we had to go move states. I have to go move with my in-laws. I had to move my kids out of the private school. It was just a lot of chaos created. Now, thankfully, to my skills of thriving in chaos, it took me about 3 months to realize that the only reason why I'm troubled with this decision that the company made is one, which is they did not consult. I didn't have a problem of losing job because I knew I could find one.
Yeah.
The problem was control. And the moment I identified that, it was very easy for me to switch, right? Because I'm like, okay, that's fine. Finding another job is not going to give me control. I can find it and I need to find it because I need to survive in terms of financial cash flow. The cash flow has to be positive, coming in, going out.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it's fine. So we need to get control. How do we get control? Now, I'm a Tony Robbins fan, and I'm sure you guys are too.
Yeah.
Uh, if you want better questions, better answers, ask better questions.
Mm.
So until that time, for between me getting laid off and my script being flipped, I was asking the question, why me and why now? Right? I've done everything right. I'm a good guy. I don't hurt people, whatever. I was telling a script in my head and it
Yeah.
was not serving me. But then I flipped the switch. So I'm like, why not me? Right. How long would I have to wait until I learned a lesson? And that lesson really was trying to take the control back. And the way I took the control back was essentially real estate. And Kenneth, you and I know we've talked about it length at that time. At that time, I think you were doing wholesaling when you and I connected.
Yeah.
We were trying to figure out, how to go cash flowing properties. And really, we started scaling them, starting investing in multifamily. I went to 0 to 1,300 units in 6 months in multifamily.
Yeah.
And then right now, have invested in close to 2,000 units. I'm syndicating, I'm capital raising. Now the world is completely changed. I'm to a point where I'm debating how long should I continue in my W-2 because I'm like, I need to figure out that path as well. That the whole purpose was to take control back, which I have now. That's not a problem. And the second thing was, why did I need the control back? I need the control back so I can control my time so that I can spend time with who I want to, how I want to, where I want to, right? A lot of these freedoms. And now we're trying to figure out, staying in W-2, does it serve that purpose or not? That's always, there's a purpose behind something. And you always want to look forward and then bring it back to today and see how it all serves. Look, I can talk for 50 minutes on your show.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
won't
yeah.
even let you get a word in. So you
No
stop me.
worries.
I'm going to pause.
No
No,
worries.
I
No worries.
appreciate that. And it's funny that you kind of talk about. So just to clarify real quick, did you do any single family investing before making that leap
I
into
had.
multifamily?
So what I
Okay.
did was up until that time, we had a few, up until 2018, we had a few
Hmm.
rental properties that
Okay.
we essentially were negative cash flow, right? They
Mm.
were bought for a very different reason. Growing up in India, we got trained to do real assets. My dad hated stock market for whatever, good or bad. I did not realize it. I thought he's just not aware. But again, life has a weird way. 22 years, or maybe not 22, about 18 years into this country,
Yeah.
I realized stock market is a facade, right?
Mhm.
Where we've all been trained, we've all been brainwashed. Now, I'm not saying don't invest in stocks or not. Who am I to say that? But go in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah.
So my dad was right on a lot of different things. I just didn't give him credit growing up. But looking back, I'm like, I wish I heard him and listened to him.
Yeah.
So he always said to buy real estate and buy gold, buy silver. And funny enough, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So we
That's
had started
awesome.
buying real estate, but they were for the wrong reason, which was negative appreciation.
Mhm.
Right? We were essentially speculating rather than investing, which is the only difference between speculating and investing, really, in my mind, is speculating is you're only betting on the gains and you have zero control on adding any value to that property
Yeah.
versus investing, which is more cash flow based. Your cash flow is going to sustain the property. And if the market goes up, which eventually it will, it's a matter of time with real estate, we all know. Now, if you were to hope that it's going to go up in 2 years, that's really speculation. But if
Yeah.
you hold it for 10, 20, 30 years, it's eventually going to go up.
It
I
sounds.
always feel like eventually it has, and eventually it will. Maybe not in the real terms, but in the nominal terms for sure.
Yeah, and it seems like that's like a recurring theme of like just your story is control, like taking control of your financial future, of your wealth, of your
Right.
lifestyle, of your freedom. That's really powerful. And Kenny, so when I told him we were going to interview you, he mentioned that you were actually one of the first people to really, I guess, expose that we had a limiting belief of not being able to get into multifamily because
Yeah.
we were
Oh my
hosting
God,
it
I
and we were
remember
like,
that phone call,
you
man. It was
remember that? Okay.
about a 40-minute phone call.
Yeah. I was on the way to
Well,
Fayetteville and
yeah.
we
I
were
think
on the phone.
you were gonna meet
I think
what's
it
the
was
guy's name, man? I can't
it was
remember his
either
name
Justin
anymore.
or Kanan.
Canaan. I
Kanan, yes.
remember Canaan. You're
So
because we
Kanan
were
was one of our cash buyers, and we had a deal that we were wholesaling to him. And I was on the phone. I don't know how we got to this topic, but I had called you. I don't know why I called really, but we were just talking about multifamily, and I was just checking in to see, what you've been up to. And
yeah.
you really said multifamily, and I told you, hey, I really have been looking into, Grant Cardone and multifamily and this and that. And then basically I told you, but maybe it's not the right time because, we're too young. And you said, no, you're not too young. Like you can get started. If you get started now, like it'd be best. And I had just kept saying, and then you
Yeah.
just kind of put that seed in our head. So of course,
No, I
thank
remember
you.
that call, man.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember that. I don't remember the aspects of the conversation, but I remember
Yeah.
the conversation we were talking about multifamily. I'm like, you guys already know most of the skills. You
Yeah.
just need to build a network, you build the ecosystem, and you're plugged into the right masterminds. Like you know what? There's no, and I did the same thing, right? When
Yeah.
I moved from single family to multifamily, my biggest limiting belief was I need to have a lot of money.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
The world
Yeah.
of syndication wasn't exposed. I wasn't exposed to the world of syndication, and the moment I got exposed to it, I'm like, you know what? This is actually a business. It's
Yeah.
not just in part-time investing. You can make a living out of doing it right. Now, doing it right is the key because you and I know there's so many syndicators where they're doing for the wrong reasons, not intentionally, but unfortunately unconsciously.
Yeah.
But they're wrapped in their own limiting beliefs. So doing it right makes sense, and I think that essentially comes with setting up the right ecosystem, being connected with the right plugged in with the right people, and listening to the people who are way smarter than us. All right,
Yes.
I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room, and I actually hate that room. If I end up being the smartest person, I want to leave that room
Yeah.
because that's where I'm not growing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And to kind of build off of like that conversation we were having earlier about chaos, you've faced a lot of adversity in your life, and I think as a real estate investor and entrepreneur, it's inevitable to face adversity. So I would love to know. I mean, in the past interview that you've done, you've kind of phrased it as you being grateful for the
Hmm.
adversity that you've had, and I think my
Yeah.
brothers we can kind of share that because we think it like has helped us build a tough skin. But I'd love to hear it from your perspective. Like, why are you grateful for all the adversity that you faced?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, right? So if you actually let's break it apart for a second. Chaos. What does chaos do? Chaos is creating an environment which you don't have an influence over. Take the word control out because control has a negative connotation sometimes.
Yeah.
Control could be your type A, right? I think when we're talking about control is you want to influence, right? So chaos is something which you don't have any influence on. So when you don't have any influence on things, what happens is what your mental model is, the world's not fitting in that mental model. So there's only two options. Either you succumb to the mental model that you have and suffer in despair, or you essentially shift your mental model to a way that you can cope up with the world's mental model, right? The world that's been presented to you. So what that does is, and I'm not a psychologist, right? This is all my own life
Yeah,
learning.
yeah, yeah.
So don't take that as a gospel.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when you think about that. Now, what happens in that moment is basically you're putting yourself in a place where uncomfortable because whatever you have known today is not going to work tomorrow because the world has changed. It's a new condition that's been brought up to you. And when you're in uncomfortable situations, you'll figure out a way by being by through your grit. I think I was talking to one of your brothers the other day. We're talking about grit, right? Because the grit is essentially it's a skill that you develop, and no one's born with a grit. You develop that skill, but you develop that skill because you're not going to give up until you figure out a way out of that situation. And through that process, you essentially develop a muscle that you never had. And now let's trace back to your question, right, Kervin, which is about chaos and how does that? I'm sorry. What was your question? Remind me again.
Well, the adversity. Why are you
Thank you.
grateful for it?
Adversity.
Yeah.
So the adversity, what does adversity do? So if you think about the parallels between the chaos and the adversity is something that you were presented, which you had no influence on. They actually are very, very similar things. Adversity is in a negative manner. Chaos is always in a negative manner as well, unless you
Yeah.
shift your perspective.
Mhm.
Adversity is the same way, and adversity is where you're growing out of your comfort zone. Right? I got laid off. I wouldn't have shifted my mental model if I didn't get laid off. In the last few years, and I think you guys know that I've lost about five family members in my family, including my sister, who was 2 years older than me, and then my mom. And then I got COVID, and my brother had a heart attack. So I'm like, you know what? These series of events, I could have literally sat down and started crying, which I did. But the way I looked at it is, you know what? Life's trying to teach me a lesson. There's something here which I'm not paying attention to. And until I change and I realize what that lesson is, life's going to keep throwing adversities at me, similar adversities. There was so much in common in a lot of deaths, a lot of passing away, a lot of sickness, right? I'm like, you know, I need to change who I am, and my time on this planet is limited. Hopefully, I have a long life, but I don't know that. Hopefully, I live like 180, 200, hopefully,
Yeah.
and hopefully it's a good life. But I could also die tomorrow, right? So nobody knows. So what we look at, it brought some urgency to us. Now, I'm very thankful for that adversity because if that didn't happen, I wouldn't have even changed my perspective. Intellectually, I knew always that eventually all of us are going to die. It's just a matter of time, right? Some have longer life, some have shorter life, and it is what it is. But experientially, I didn't realize what would that do to me.
Mhm.
Right? When I started losing family members in my family, I'm like, you know, that adversity, I'm actually sad, but I'm also very thankful because that shifted, that brought some level of urgency in my own life. So now what we have done is from there is we have essentially changed our why. We were always trying to impact other lives, but now we're actually taking it to a significantly different level. When I say we, it's me and my wife. We're business
Mhm.
partners. We're basically now saying is we're gonna sponsor K through 12 education for kids, underprivileged kids across the world, predominantly in India because that's where I'm from and I know how it works there. And there's a need. Not that there's only need. That's the only place there's needs. There's need other places as well.
Yeah.
But about 100,000 kids is what we want to do by the end of 2030. It's about a
Yeah.
$6 million goal.
That's awesome.
That's
We're
awesome.
gonna get there, and the
Yes.
way we're getting there is not through donations. We're basically getting it there is we're partnering with our investors and the profits we make in the deal. We're not asking our investors to do anything different. They're coming in as investors in any deal. They could come to your deal or my deal, whatever. Right. So they're getting the returns what they're getting, but the profits we make, we take part of that profit and make sure that we use that to a reason that's more appealing to our own values. Right?
Yeah.
That's how we're doing it now. It would not have happened, I can almost guarantee, if the adversities in my life didn't happen. So I want to just circle back to your question.
Oh yeah. I
That's really
appreciate
why I'm thankful, and I want to take an ounce of gratitude towards the adversities, because in the moments of adversities, the decisions you make really shapes your destiny.
Mhm.
I completely agree with that, and I think that's an awesome cause. And
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, really what we've learned, entrepreneurship has really taught us, like, we'll get thrown just a random curveball and or just like a wall, an obstacle. And you really have to like be quick on your feet. Maybe not necessarily quick, right? But you have to become good at coming up with another route, because
Yeah,
you figure out very quickly, okay, this route doesn't work. Let's move on to the next route. Okay,
correct.
that route
Correct.
doesn't work. Or maybe it does work, but there's something missing, right? So it
Mhm.
makes you think in a different way. And these are things that you're not taught, in the normal sense of like education, but these are things that if you don't learn in life,
Yeah.
you become stuck a lot, because
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
just unfortunately throws curveball at you.
It does. Excuse me. So I think, one thing just on top of that, right? So I think as a W-2 employee, you're asked to just work on one skill.
Mhm.
So maybe you're leading a marketing department, maybe you're leading a finance department, maybe you're leading a sales department.
Yeah.
You're never trained or asked to do multiple things in a business, right? And as a W-2 employee. But in a business, you are the janitor,
Yeah.
you are the sales guy or gal, you are doing marketing, you're doing finance, you're doing everything by yourself until you get to a scale, and then maybe you eventually you can hire the team, right?
Yep.
But to get to that scale, you need to develop a lot of different skills. Now you can say that it's too hard, and a lot of people throw in their towels just because of that reason, because it is hard. Entrepreneurship is not easy, but it gives you the freedom. So you have to make that choice. But eventually, if you work hard at it and if you give your 100%, the returns are exponentially higher than what your W-2 job could have given you. Now, don't get me wrong, Apple's CEO, Tim Cook,
Yeah.
right? But that's Tim Cook's. There's only so many people like that.
Yeah.
But for normal individuals, for people like us, common masses, we're looking at, what, if you want to have a choice between W-2 and you give up your entire life for someone, versus you could start an entrepreneurial journey, or you can be at your W-2, but create a financial freedom for yourself. So you may not want to work that hard, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're working that hard because you think you have to.
Mhm.
That's not a right way of approaching life, because nothing in life should be have to.
Have
It's
to. Yeah.
Yeah.
because you want to.
Yeah.
And the only leverage that you have to create that is by creating passive income through investments such as your deal, my deal, like other folks' deal, where we're trying to make sure that your money works for you while you're sleeping rather than you not sleeping.
Yes.
That's 100% true. And in the past, you've talked about, so we recently had a deal, and we were working on the raise, and things were, you get curveballs thrown your way. And so a lot of times you have a lot of uncertainty. And I think there's a lot of people in this economy right now dealing with uncertainty, both
Yeah.
active investors and passive investors. And in the past, you've mentioned the importance of like having habits and, I guess, reflecting on what you would do day to day, just like keep moving the needle forward.
Yeah.
And so that when you're going through an adversity or a challenge, it's something that you're not really sure how
Mhm.
to deal with, you kind of know what to fall back on. Can you expand on that and maybe how that's
Yeah,
manifested
definitely. So,
on your journey?
being thankful for adversity, it sounds good, right? You
Yeah.
can write a paper on it, thesis on it, and everyone's good at it. But unfortunately, what happens is it is not a thought that people lead with, right?
Mm.
Because adversity has a negative connotation. Negative
Yeah.
connotation is my life sucks. The first impression is people look at what? There are only three things to do. You can blame an event, you can blame somebody else, or you can blame you. Not all of these in my mind, are not right, because blame doesn't move forward. Whoever is it, to outside or internal, doesn't matter, right? So, what I think the question we're now asking is that if tomorrow an adversity hits, how am I going to deal with it, Mr. Saket? So let's just ask that question ourselves. Like, how are we going to deal with that? If this is the first time you have ever dealt with adversity, you don't have a mental model. When I'm saying that, it's not true statement, because life throws so much adversity at us. It's just that we place some adversities higher importance than the other, right? So on the scale of adversity, we only remember the hardest ones. We don't remember the we couldn't walk at some point, that we had to train ourselves to crawl, right? We
Yeah.
forget that's an adversity at that point. You just don't remember it consciously, right? At some point, you had to go to school and you hated it, but you hated brushing. All these are adversities, but we built a muscle, right? So I think the way to look at my opinion, Kervin, to your question is, we need to make sure that you're building a muscle when you are at top of your game, not when the adversity hits. Either you bring an external force that holds you accountable to build that muscle, like in our cases, like when our parents forced us to brush when we hated brushing. And
Yeah.
now, no matter how sad you are, chances are you're going to brush your teeth
Yeah.
because you don't have to think about it. That's a muscle that's already inbuilt in you. But as a kid, I mean, I hated brushing. I didn't care what that does to me, good or bad. I hated it, but I was forced to do it. I'm sure with a lot of people have been the same way. So I think what we need to do is we need to force some habits to make sure we're ready for the next adversity, because it's not a question of when the adversity hits, or sorry, if the adversity hits. It's a matter of when it
Right.
hits,
Yeah.
right? Because it's coming. And that's what life is about, right? Life is not all peaks.
Sunshine and
It's peaks and
rainbows.
valleys. Yeah, sunshine and rainbows. It's not all that. It's all ups and downs. So we need to build a muscle now. Now
Yeah.
that's a question. How do we build a muscle now? I think one of the biggest way to build a muscle now is reflect on your adversities, right? So how big or how small, in the morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time. Pick a time where you're basically taking few minutes off of your day and reflecting on where you were about a year, about 2 years, about 20 years. Pick a timeline that works for you and reflect how far have you come or how short are you, right, from where you wanted to go. But focus on two things: gap versus gain. There's actually a great book. I can't remember who wrote it, Gap versus Gain, which is most people reflect on how short they are from their goal instead of focusing on how far have they come, right? And usually how far they have come is not because of their own skill set, it's because of the challenges that were presented to them, right? And if
Yeah.
we start continuously reflecting on the challenges that they've overcome, I think eventually you build a muscle where you're not looking at adversity as an adversity, you're looking as another problem that you need to solve, right? And you start to shift your perspective because your relationship with adversity changes. Until that point, adversity is something, oh, let me go cry on some shoulder. Let me go look at a friend who'll say, yes, this is the worst thing that has happened to you. We're all looking for confirmation, right? We're not solace. We're not looking for, chances are, when most people are not looking for people who push ourselves, like, get out of this mess and go figure out how to solve it because you've done crazy things before and
Yeah.
crazy things that have happened to you before. Let's move forward instead of saying, hey, let's go cry about it, because crying is fine. But I also say that, you know what, you need to have a timeline for crying. Now, that doesn't mean I'm being heartless and saying that, hey, you know what, you can only cry for 2 minutes. I'm not saying that. I'm gonna pick a time. If you want to cry for 1 year, great. If you want to cry for 20 years, that's fine by me too. But pick a time, because what it does is when you pick that time, it gives your amygdala, which is the back part of your brain, a pause. It gives you a thing like, is it worth crying for 20 years over something that happened to me now? How is that going to affect my next 20 years, or next 1 minute, or next 2 years, or next 2 weeks, whatever that is? And if you, and of course, don't be too hard on yourself. That does not mean if after 1 minute, if that was your timeline, you're not recovered, that you failed. You didn't. You
Yes.
start the timer again. Right? You start the timer again. You start the timer again. Because what you're training your mind is, I'm going to get out of it, instead of saying I want to stay in it. Because if that's your emotional home of guilt and despair, you're going to suffer eventually. What we're trying to figure out is break our mental pattern so we can break out of it rather than stay in it. And it's a
Yeah.
habit, it's a muscle that you build intentionally. It's not going to come to you without any effort.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like, even if you don't know how to deal with the issue, and I know you're a big fan of this book, Who Not How.
Yeah,
If you don't know the answer, then that's why it's important to have a network, because you are going to encounter challenges
correct.
that you've never faced before. And so, the last question before our speed round, but
Mhm.
how important has it been in your journey to have a network you could tap into, and how did you approach kind of creating the right network that you knew would help you with challenges you hadn't even encountered yet?
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing, especially as an entrepreneur, less so as an employee. right? Employee, the network is given to you. Like this is your team or this is your peers, right? They selected for you. But as an entrepreneur, or as an investor, you need to surround yourself with people who have accomplished what you want to accomplish 10 years from now. Right? I know you guys do a phenomenal job at it. So kudos to you guys because you
Thank
guys
you.
are everywhere. Where at least I am, and I'm pretty sure you're even more
Yeah.
places than I'm not. So great job at that. So I think it's
Awesome.
more about you need to create that network because that network and also networking is strategic, right? You have to make sure that you're doing the networking because for the right reasons, not because you just thought that something's going to happen for you. Randomly, you're going to meet XYZ person and your life's going to change. That doesn't happen. It'll never happen. It may happen but the probability of that is so low. Why leave it to a chance, right? So it's more strategic. So for me, it was let's talk about my journey, right? From single family to multifamily. Once I knew that I needed to get exposed to multifamily, I started really looking at who do I know around me who has invested in multifamily? And I quickly found out nobody. I'm like, okay, so that network is not the right network. And when you ask those people, and I'm sure you guys have some of your very good well wishers and friends, they will say oh, multifamily is very risky, right? Or why would it? Like I remember distinctly, I was at a barbecue with a very good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time, and I'm like, you know what? This is what I want to do. He's like, Saket, why would people give you money? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, who are you? Like, and I'm like, that MF. I need to show him what I can do. I had no idea what
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
he had some truth, but it also had a limiting belief. The way I looked at it is I need to build myself to a point where if I go present somebody an opportunity, they'll get excited about it, right?
Yeah.
And I'll get credibility. So who do I get credibility from? It's just a series of questions. You start looking at it. My biggest thing is if I don't have the credibility, I need to partner with somebody who has credibility because they may not be investing in me, which is fair because my friends have seen me drunk in my underwear. So I'm like, that's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So we need to figure out how am I going to bring credibility back to me? And it's credibility through association, which is tremendous. I think that's really what happens when you start looking at networking this way is what gaps are you trying to fill and who can fill that gap fastest?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not unfortunately, the way my friend was looking at it is I had to be an expert. Saket, you need to be an expert. But the way I looked at it is I don't have to be the expert because I don't have to be a student in an entrepreneurship game. I just have to know who to bring on my team through partnerships that I can be successful as a group. We can be successful as a team rather than me being successful individually. So
Yeah.
really,
You
that's my philosophy of networking, Kervin.
yeah.
And that's
That's
what I live
phenomenal.
by.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You just
no,
have to have
that's
that all-star team. And
Always is.
I love that.
Always is.
And you've also talked about like authentic networking, and I like that a lot. We completely agree. Something that we have been learning recently is just being like authentic with the conversations you're having at conferences and
Yeah, I think
trying not to
be
be
interested
transactional.
in people, right? Because
Yeah.
all of us have looked at. I'm talking to Kenneth, and behind the scene, there's a Kervin walking in. I'm not listening to what Kenneth is saying because I'm more interested in who am I going to meet next.
yeah.
Exactly.
People see it. People see right through it, right?
Yeah.
I have encountered so many people who are like, you know what, I will never work with them again because they didn't even care who I am without knowing. Now, if they knew me and they didn't want to talk to me, that's one thing. But they're not approaching the interaction with an open mind. Why would I would want to associate myself with somebody like that? Because
Absolutely.
they won't take me seriously or the value I add seriously until God knows when, right? And I don't
Yeah.
have that much time. I don't want to waste my time. So I think it's very very important to make sure that we're seeing things in a way that we're actively listening in the conversation, and that takes a lot. Takes a lot
Yeah.
of energy out. I mean, you guys know that
Yeah.
when you're actually talking about people's stories, they're opening their heart to you at some conversations.
Oh
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you have to be respectful for that. And you have to make sure that you appreciate that. And they need to
Absolutely.
remember walking away from a conversation that they had the best conversation in the world, that they couldn't even talk to their spouses, is really
Powerful.
when you make that connection, that's lifelong.
Yeah. I
And
completely agree.
don't I mean you and I know a lot of people who are great at it at the surface, right? But I'm basically saying take your networking deeper so that you build lifelong friendships.
No, that's
Yeah,
that's the way to
that's
do it too, because
absolutely.
then you work with your friends. So that's awesome.
You work with your friends. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Mr. Saket, it's time for our speed round. Are you
You
ready?
gotta stop calling me Mr.
I know
Saket, man.
it was a
I'm like, you're
slip.
gonna turn me
Saket.
like an 85-year-old person. I'm
It's
not there
slip.
yet.
It's slip.
Eventually, I'll get there.
Saket, it is time for our speed round. Are you ready?
I am.
Awesome. All right. Now, the question number one: what has been the biggest failure in real estate for you, and what did you learn from that experience?
It was really my first deal, which I thought, I've always been an A student. I've always been high performer at my work, and anything I've done, I'm like, I can do it myself, which was the failure for me because I lost not only the deal, but I also lost 5 months of my life. It was a deal that I thought I could find an off market deal myself, which I did. Um, it was in a market which was great. It's still a great market, but unfortunately, what happened was along the way, sellers sellers property management company actually recognized the bad debt 2 weeks before the closing, which essentially led to us getting our loan proceeds reduced by $2.5 million.
Wow.
Now we could two aspects to it. Could we raise another $2.5 million? I don't know. Maybe we could, maybe we couldn't. My it was fearful for me. I'm like, I can't raise 2.4. We just raised about $7 million. That was my first deal. First time I'm asking somebody for money. We were able to raise it. I'm like, the second thing was, which is more important, is has the deal, if we raise another $2.4 million and reduce the leverage, how does that impact my entire deal structure? Has it materially changed? And it did. So what we ended up doing was we ended up not going through that deal, lost a ton of money because the money was hard, which essentially means that we had the due diligence money or the deposit money that would be forfeited if we didn't go through the transaction. So we lost a ton of money, but what we learned is we have the courage and I have the wherewithal to make sure to do the right things with my investors, which was essentially to give their money back. It was the hardest thing, man. I mean, when there's $7 million for somebody who's never raised the money, they're sitting in the bank waiting for you to get deploy them, and you're like, we're not going to go through it. We're going to take a huge loss on ourselves and give the money back to our investors. It took a lot out of me, but what it told me is I have it in me to do the right thing, right? So that's really what the lesson I learned, that first of all, you may be the smartest person in that team, but you don't know everything. You can't watch out for everything. Right?
Yeah.
Like reflecting back, we could have alerted the property management company 2 or 3 months ago before saying, don't do this or that.
Yeah.
But we just didn't even know, right? Because everything was going well. But these blind spots that come up, and what happened to us really, we talked to a lot of lenders and our mentors, like it happens to 1 in 1,000th person. So not like we could have avoided it,
Yeah.
but there was always a chance that we could have if we had the right team and the right people watching over that aspect of it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you learned a lot from that experience.
A lot, man. Ton of it.
Awesome.
Ton of it. Now, I'm not saying everyone should go make a mistake to learn.
Yeah.
That's why you have people like me and you, right? We're
Yes.
basically, we're learning through our mistakes and putting our money and time at risk rather than our investors' money.
And other people can learn from your mistakes in your journey.
Course.
So that's perfect.
Of course.
Perfect.
And that's why, another power of networking is people who are way ahead of you, they've already made mistakes. You can just compress your time. It took them 10 years and it may only take you 1 year.
Exactly. Now, to kind of fast forward to the present, where is your business at today and what are you aiming to accomplish moving forward?
Yeah. So for us, it's really continuing the route of presenting to our investors opportunities that are outside of the Wall Street, more real assets. So we're actually just launching a venture fund right now, which is going to be in the medical surgical instruments department. So I have a very good partner that I'm partnering with. Again, partner with people who are way better than you, and that's his specialty. So we're going to be launching that. I'm launching a few other passive investments for my investors, and giving them the opportunity to make sure they feel comfortable.
Awesome.
And the way to make them comfortable is not just, for me at least, is not to just give them a cookie cutter solution. Multifamily is great, which is bread and butter for me. But it's not an answer for everybody. Right.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I become their one-stop shop for my investors where they're like, you know what, I need a cash flow investment. Like, you know what, go to investment class A. I need an appreciating asset. Go to venture capital. Or I need a tax depreciation. Go to oil and gas. There's so many different options that we can provide.
Yeah.
Because I really believe everyone needs different opportunities. So that's really where our business is going, Kervin, to make sure that We have a portfolio that we can grow into. And biggest goal is, how can we get to a point where we can not feed? I'm just coming from a Tony Robbins event. That's why feeding is in top of my head. It's more about teaching the kids, sponsoring K through 12 for 100,000 kids. That's really the mission we have. And one way or the other, we're going to get it. So that's really what keeps us going. So our business objective is not a net worth number, not how many units we need to have. It's really how many kids have we impacted.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So at the moment, you can name two, either one personal book or one business book, but what would be a good book that you would recommend to someone either in real estate?
There's one book that's right behind
life?
you. Actually, both the books are behind you.
Oh, awesome.
One is Who Not How.
Okay, awesome.
Which is the best book, talking about the theme that we're having in this podcast.
Yeah.
And really, the second book is Edward Griffin's Creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh, yeah.
It's just opens your mind to a world. Now, it's a very thick book.
Yeah.
But you can get through much faster if you just he tells you how to read the book. There's a way to read that book, which you can get it much faster. But if you are a nerd like me, you want to read every single word that the man has poured into it. It took him a long time to write that book.
Yeah.
Right. So those two books really, a lot of research, a lot of fact finding. So I really think that everyone should read that book because it gives you a mental model of how this world works. And going back to our chaos theory, which is if your mental model is not fitting the mental model of how the world works, everything to you is a chaos. And this book will help you relieve some of that chaos and give you a way to cope up with that chaos, because it'll give you an answer of how the world really works, like how the Fed really works, and what are the incentives, what are the motivations. You'll start to make sense of what's happening in the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Saket. If anyone in our audience wants to learn more about you or just follow you on your journey, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, definitely. We can go on my website, impactwealthbuilders.com. That's one place where you can find what we have. We usually keep it current. You can go on my own podcast, which I know we just recorded with you guys.
Yeah.
It's going to be coming out soon. Migrate to Wealth, and that's his number 2, Migrate to Wealth. And last but not the least, I would love for anyone to reach me directly on my cell phone. I don't have a team that sees my cell phones. I read every single text message, and I'm the only one responding to them. I don't have a virtual assistant who's doing it for me. So if they want to reach out to me, this number is 703-380-2020. Any questions you have about your journey, your passive journey, I would love to have a talk with you and see how I may be able to help.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for your time, Saket. And thanks everyone for tuning in today to the Real Estate Monopoly. If you got any value, what should they do?
Yeah, if you have got any value, make sure you guys leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or really wherever you're listening, and go ahead and follow us on pretty much Donis Brothers on every single platform. So
hey guys, let's get out there and take action. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
And you know what? Before we end this,
yes,
what I'll do is, I'm sorry I had to say that. If you actually give a 5-star review and send me a text after that review, I'll give you a first 60 minutes of my coaching for free. Just come in. I would love to talk to you and kind of see, let's build a wealth blueprint for you, and both for active or passive. This is something I usually charge for, but you have to show me that you have left a review. Now, it doesn't have to be 5-star. Leave the review that you really like.
Yeah.
But send me a copy of your review. Awesome. I'll need that to honor my commitment.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we appreciate that.
Thank you, Thank you, Saket. And I
there you go. Time. I caught it. That's perfect. Thank you, Kervin.
I stopped there. Alrighty, guys. Have a great day. Take action.
Thank you, guys.